You're listening to a CNA podcast.
In Taiwan, more than 80% of the public supports the death penalty. Yet, executions are rare and increasingly difficult to carry out. In September 2024, Taiwan's Constitutional Court ruled that capital punishment remains constitutional, but only under some of the strictest conditions ever imposed. Then, in January 2025, Taiwan carried out its first execution in 5 years. This latest execution has reignited the debate whether to abolish Taiwan's death penalty. I'm Genevieve Woo, and joining me today is our Senior Correspondent Victoria Jen, who has been tracking the story for months, where she spoke to the people caught in between, victims' families who feel justice is slipping away, and those who say the risk of executing the innocent is too great to ignore. Vic, thanks for joining me on this story. It must have been a difficult one for you. Your report on the debate in Taiwan over capital punishment. You had met a husband still grieving the violent death of his wife, and a man who once waited 16 years on death row for a crime he did not commit. Let's start with who we're meeting first, Jerome Chang. Who is he and what's his story?
Hey Jen, let me tell you about Jerome. He's a retired professor and the husband of a woman who was raped and then beaten to death with a hammer more than 10 years ago. It was an extremely violent crime that shocked many people in Taiwan. And the man convicted of killing his wife was sentenced to death, not just once, but 5 times by Taiwan's courts. Now, for Jerome, those rulings mattered. They told him the justice system recognized the seriousness of the crime and the scale of his loss, but later that death sentence was overturned and replaced with life imprisonment. Now, in Taiwan, life imprisonment does not necessarily mean spending the rest of your life in prison. Inmates can apply for parole after 25 years, according to a recent amendment. So for Jerome, that reversal was a shock. He told me that the courts had already gone through full legal procedures. So when all that was overturned in a single decision, it felt as though everything that came before, including his wife's suffering, had been dismissed. This is how Jerome described that feeling.
我很生气啊，本来就是啊。好，为什么无期我不能接受啊？
I'm really angry. Why did it become life imprisonment? I couldn't accept that. In Taiwan, life imprisonment doesn't really mean life in prison. Right now, on average, people can apply for parole after 17 and a half years. He committed the crime at 38. He'd be out again before he's even 60 if he gets parole. I support the death penalty. I support it 100%. It's not that executing the murderer will bring our loved one back from the dead, but at least it gives us some measure of comfort emotionally.
从死中复活，但是至少在我们心理上得到安慰。
Now, Victoria, you spent a lot of time with Jerome Chang in this report. Now, when he talks about justice being taken away again, what did you hear beneath that anger? And how did it shape the way you approach his story?
What I heard beneath Jerome's anger was deep trauma, in a sense that the system had forced him to relive the worst moment of his life over and over again. Every time the case went back to court, Jerome had to revisit what happened to his wife, the sexual assault, the violence, the way she was killed. He told me that these weren't just legal proceedings. Each review reopened the wound and reminded him that his loss was never truly over. So when the death sentence was overturned, it felt like justice was being taken away a second time. He felt the system had first recognized his pain through repeated death sentences, and then erased everything with a single ruling. That understanding really shaped how I approach his story. I was very careful not to frame Jerome as a simply pro-independence penalty. Instead, I focus on his grief and on how his legal process itself can become another source of suffering for victims' families. Now, I try to let him speak in his own words, without judgment and without turning his pain into an argument. Because whether or not people agree with his views, his emotions come from his loss, not ideology. This is how Jerome described that feeling of anger and betrayal in his own words.
The state is unable to give me fairness or justice. All the earlier proceedings followed proper legal process, and there were 5 death sentences handed down, and you're telling me those don't count? Just like that, with a single decision, you overturn everything that came before, regardless of what we think, what society thinks, or those 5 publicly conducted court trials that sentenced him to death. You just wipe them all out. What kind of justice is that?
Wow, Victoria, I think just listening to that, you can actually feel it, isn't it? His deep sense of betrayal by the system. And it just keeps reopening his wound and, like you said, his trauma, isn't it? The story then shifts to Tzu Chiang, this man who spent 16 years on death row for a crime he did not commit. Now, you spoke to him too. Tell us briefly about his case and why did you think it was important to place his story alongside Jerome's?
Xu Ziqiang was sentenced to death for kidnapping and murdering a businessman, a crime he did not commit. But he spent 16 years on death row, living every day with the fear that he could be executed. And years later, lawyers uncovered serious problems in his case, including unreliable evidence and flaws in the investigation. So after a long legal process, his conviction was overturned and he was released. But by then, his wife already left him and he never saw his son growing up. Now, placing his story alongside with Jerome's was a deliberate choice because Jerome represents victims' families who fear justice is being weakened, and Xu represents the other side of the same system. What happens when it gets things wrong? Now, both stories are deeply uncomfortable, but together they show the full weight of the death penalty debate in Taiwan. Now, one man wants closure after a horrific crime. The other nearly lost his life because of a wrongful conviction.
And with the review, and of course, then the new sentence for Sue, the innocent victim in a sense, it challenged public assumptions in Taiwan, didn't it, Victoria?
Oh yeah, very much so. Many people believe that the justice system has enough safeguards to prevent serious mistakes. Xu's case shows that even after years of trials and appeals, errors can still happen. Now, what makes the death penalty different from any other punishment is that it's irreversible. A prison sentence can be corrected, but an execution cannot. Xu doesn't frame his argument around big ideas like human rights. He talks about trust, or rather, the lack of it. He says he does not trust the justice system because it failed him so completely. And his point is simple. As long as wrongful convictions cannot be completely eliminated, the death penalty carries an unacceptable risk. And this is how Xu explains it in his own words.
I think the death penalty should be abolished. I personally don't support it because people make mistakes, and the death penalty is irreversible. If a mistake is made, someone loses their life. That's it. There's no way to undo it. And why is it that we're always told killing is wrong, yet the law is allowed to kill? What exactly has been solved? I often say, what does the death penalty actually resolve?
Jerome and Sue say they don't trust Taiwan's justice system, but they're coming from opposite ends, aren't they? One supports death penalty, the other rejects it. But taken together, a victim's family seeking closure, and a man nearly executed by mistake. Is this incompatibility why Taiwan is divided on the death penalty?
Yeah, and I think this really gets to the heart of the divide. Jerome doesn't trust the system to stand by its decisions and deliver lasting justice for victims. Xu doesn't trust the system to avoid irreversible mistakes. Now, one fears justice being undone, and the other fears justice going too far. Now, what's striking is that both are saying the same thing at the core. The system is not perfect. And when a system is imperfect, the death penalty becomes problematic. Taiwan isn't arguing over whether justice matters. It's actually arguing over which kind of injustice is harder to accept. Do you risk releasing someone who committed a gruesome crime, or do you risk executing someone who may be innocent? Now, that tension explains why this debate remains so emotional and so unresolved.
And you also spoke to legal experts in Taiwan, and they are also divided on the issue. What did they recommend on going forward with the proposal to abolish the death penalty?
This is where politics and law really intersect. Abolishing the death penalty has long been supported by the ruling Democratic Progressive Party. The party first took that position years ago, largely on the grounds of human rights and as part of aligning Taiwan with international norms, especially since Taiwan is not a UN member, but wants to show it upholds global standards. But the problem is public opinion. Like you mentioned, more than 80% of the people in Taiwan still support the death penalty. So full abolition is politically risky, especially for any government that doesn't want to alienate victims' families. That's why legal experts told me that what we're seeing now is not a clean move towards abolition, but a compromise. Instead of removing the death penalty outright, Taiwan's constitutional court has made it much harder to implement. The system now includes some of the strictest safeguards Taiwan has ever had. For instance, death sentences must be decided unanimously by judges. People with serious mental disorders cannot be executed, and the punishment must be limited to the most serious crimes. Some scholars describe this as a form of de facto abolition. The death penalty still exists, but the hurdles are so high that the executions are now extremely rare. I spoke to Professor Bill Xu of the Central Police University. He's been following Taiwan's capital punishment system for decades. Here's what he said about the possibility of completely removing the death penalty.
I don't think full abolition will be easy. This ruling sets multiple hurdles. It must be the most serious crimes with intent and multiple casualties, and the procedures must be the strictest.
Victoria, was there a moment that you struggled as a reporter covering this true story? Because you spoke to two opposite sides of the spectrum and both very emotional and very traumatic, isn't it? How did you feel?
Yeah, I struggled many times. The hardest part was moving between interviews. I would spend time with Jerome, listening to his anger and grief over the rape and murder of his wife. Then I would sit with Xu, who calmly described spending 16 years on death row for a crime he didn't commit. Now, both stories were heavy, and what made it difficult was that neither of them was wrong from their own experience. Now, as a reporter, you're trained to stay neutral, but when you have to face that kind of level of pain, neutrality isn't automatic. It's something you have to work at. I had to constantly remind myself not to take sides. Another challenge was resisting the urge to simplify the story. Now, it would have been easier to frame this as a clear debate for or against the death penalty. but that wouldn't reflect reality. People's view on this issue come from loss, fear, and personal experience. So basically, my job was to listen and let those voices be heard.
Exactly that, Victoria. It's not just an academic debate, isn't it? Honestly, this is one of the toughest podcasts I've had to produce so far because so much of it is wrapped up in personal grief. There's fear, and of course, the legal complexities, and they intersect very messily. And they make up a lot of moral tension, at least for me. Sounds like you were struggling with that too. And if there's one takeaway that you want our audience to wrestle with from your report, what would that idea be?
I hope people walk away understanding that this debate has no easy answers. It's not about being tough or soft on crime. It's about what we expect from a justice system run by humans and therefore capable of error. Taiwan's experience shows that there is no perfect justice, only difficult choices. And the question is whether a society is willing to accept the risk that comes with the ultimate punishment, knowing that once it's carried out, there is no way back.
Right, Victoria, thank you very much for putting together this challenging report. The death penalty debate in Taiwan isn't just about law or punishment. It's equally about loss and grief. For some, it represents accountability. For others, an irreversible risk. As Taiwan continues to navigate this divide, the question remains, how do you deliver justice in a system that can never be perfect? Thank you for joining me on this episode of the CNA Correspondent Podcast. It's brought to you by Clara Ong, Tiffany Ang, Nat Vetavero, Craig Dale, and me, Genevieve Woo. Bye for now.